My name is Sigler, and this is the comprehensive exam dress rehearsal for the presentation, the action research presentation for the instructional leadership degree reduced hour option. Now, for my action research project, it is titled 11th grade ACT reading scores and intervention strategies. Now, the problem that I investigated, I noticed low reading levels amongst my 11th grade U.S. history students in my classes. And so what I wanted to do was come up with a way to bring those reading scores up. Now, and so my problem statement, I saw the low reading levels, the low reading skills, and so the problem is those low reading skills of the general education students in my U.S. 2 American history classes. So my hypothesis was, my goal was to give them reading strategies, and the students would improve their reading comprehension scores, and that would be evidenced by how they did on the 2016 ACT scores, or ACT test results, and the reading subtest scores. And we wanted to hit the state average, which we'll talk about in a second. As far as definitions for my proposal, general education student, this is a regular education student in the classroom in my American history class, no modifications, they're not special education. American history class, this is the actual class that I'm teaching. It's an 11th grade U.S. history class that covers Reconstruction to the present day. And it's taught by an American history teacher with certification to teach that class, which is me. Reading comprehension, this is the aptitude level of students when it comes to reading. When they read the text, how they process the text, and do they understand what the text means. The state average, this is going to be the average of all the students in the state of Alabama who take the test, and that's our goal, is to reach the state average. And the ACT reading subtest, this is the ACT test is the most familiar, most accepted test of college readiness that students have today. And the ACT reading subtest, that's an actual portion of the ACT where students, it's a quarter of the test, and what they do is they look at the test, and it's all reading. And so, and it's a portion, and you have maths, science, and language with that too, in addition to reading. Now, as far as the classes that I go over, that I use in the project, fall 2015, spring 2016 classes. What we've got, there's some similarities and differences. At 20 students in the fall 2015, had 13 in the spring 2016 class. Of those students, in the fall 2015, I had 12 females, 8 males, whereas in the spring 2016, I had 8 males and 5 females. As far as race, I had 15 African American students out of the 20 in the fall 2015, and I had 12 African Americans out of 13 in the spring 2016 class. So very diverse. As far as socioeconomic status, I had 15 of the 20 free and reduced lunch out of the 20 in the fall 2015, and I had 9 free and reduced lunch out of 13 in the second. So you're looking at this and have low socioeconomic status. One thing that stood out to me, of the 20 students I tested in the fall 2015, 6 of them were special ed, whereas 0 of 13 were special ed in the spring 2016 class. Now, scores for ACT comparison. In 2015, the Alabama state average composite score on the ACT was 18.8, whereas the national average was 21.0. Now, the 2016 ACT scores for Alabama will not be released until August of 2016, so we're going to have to use these 2015 scores for comparison. Now, what I did to gather my data, my students, as 10th graders, they take a test called the ACT Plan, which is a practice ACT test because you start taking the real ACT test your junior year. And what the ACT Plan test does is it gives you a number of how are you going to do on the real ACT. It's kind of like a practice ACT test. And so what I've got here in the fall 2015 class, I have their scores up here, which I'll show you in a minute. And then the results for the spring 2016 class, which are here. Now, the proposed timeline for this project, the classes started in August of 2015 for the fall, and then January of 2016 for the spring. So in those 2 separate months, the classes began, I confirmed the demographics, I examined their data from the plan. And then the strategies of the plan, which I'm going to talk about in a second, were implemented all throughout the school year. And as far as in May, that's when I gathered results when the classes ended and I prepared them. Now, the reading intervention strategies that I actually use in the classroom. We use 4. Every 2 weeks, we use 4 reading strategies. We use practice ACT tests, which were tests from the ACT website that mimic the real test. So this gives them an expectation of what to know when they actually take the ACT test. So they're actually taking practice ACT tests. They did primary source document activities. These are primary source document is anything, any first-hand account of history. It can be a speech, it can be a letter that somebody, a president wrote, it can be a historical piece from someone. But they would take actual pieces of history from the first-hand account and do activities with those. They use something called text analysis. This strategy, what you do is you take a piece, and a lot of times they're primary source document activities. You take 5 words you don't understand, 5 big words, and you define those words. You go back and reread the text with the defined words, and it helps you gain understanding of the passage, whereas in the beginning when you didn't know those words. And then current event summaries. I gave the students a lot of leeway on this. I let them look up current events that were going on in the news, or sometimes in sports, to get them to read, actually go out and read articles, and then summarize them in their own words. So every 2 weeks, we did these 4 strategies. Now, after we implemented the strategies to the test, and have the results. So what I've got here is a chart. The R stands for the reading, the C stands for the composite scores. We're going to show a comparison of each class. So for the fall 2015, looking at these numbers here, on average for the 20 students on the reading plan test, the reading subtest, 14.05 was the average. Whereas on the ACT, that average went to 16.15. Now on the plan composite, it was 14.2, but after taking the ACT, the composite average jumped to 16.45. So we had increases there. For the spring class, on the plan, the original scores, the reading subtest was 14.38. When the reading test was taken for the ACT, it went to 15.23. As far as the plan composite for the spring 2016, 14.77. And then for the composite ACT test, 15.46. So if we look at this, and I've got these here, the fall 2015 class, their ACT reading scores increased 2.21 on average for the class, 2.21 from the plan to the ACT, and for the composite, it increased to 2.25. Where you look at the 2016 class, the spring, the ACT reading scores increased by 0.85, whereas the composite scores increased by 0.69. Now, to put that in comparison of the other scores, we have the averages here. Now, we can look at the state average, which is 18.8 2015. And when you look at the average composite here, and you look at the both the fall and the spring, 16.45, 15.46, it's not 18.8. So my students did not achieve the state average on the ACT, but looking at it from a more positive perspective, they did have increases. The increase of 2.25 on the composite for the fall and 0.69 for the spring. We'd like that to be more, but we did have an increase. And another thing we look at on this, and even with the national average being 21.0, not everybody is required to take the ACT in the nation. So basically what you're going to have, the test taker, and this was not true for Alabama 2015, but it will be 2016. When you look at this, the scores, not everybody's taking it. So really the only people that were taking it here, students more geared to go to college in the first place and need it. So the students that would do low and poorly, they're not going to take it, whereas now they're taking it. So that's going to bring that average down. So we did have some increases. When you look at these numbers, I would expect the Alabama average to most likely decrease since we have so many more test takers. Now, as far as instructional leadership standards covered by this project, there were several. I have them here. I do want to cover a couple. The first one focused upon student learning as a driving force for curriculum instruction and instructional or institutional decision making. This drove my project. My whole goal was, how should I teach this class? How should the reading strategies drove my curriculum, the instruction, to try to get these students' reading scores up. I used diagnostic tools to assess, identify, and apply instructional improvement. We did most of this online. We used the practice ACT reading test. We used online assignments, and this helped us to using these tools to assess all this data. And even with the scoring on the ACT test too. And we also, the last one I do want to cover, use multiple sources of data to plan and assess instructional improvement. We did 4 different reading strategies. We're using all this different data, primary source, we're using current events. So we covered many of these standards in this project. And this moves me on to the second part of the comprehensive exam presentation, which is the school funding dilemma. Now, the problem we have in Alabama is across the nation. School funding. How do you appropriately fund schools? How do you fairly fund schools? Money is most likely the greatest need of every school system. The problem with that is states run the education systems, and states have limited funding for everything, and education has to get some of that money. So my presentation here will offer solutions to properly fund education in America with a particular focus on Alabama. The first part of this to appropriately fund education in our state would be change the Alabama tax structure. The Alabama educational money mostly comes from sales taxes. We're dependent, and sales taxes are going to be dependent on the economy. If the economy is good, more money. If the economy is down, less money, and we have problems. If we changed our tax structure to a property-based tax system, which most states already do, that's going to be a more reliable tax base for your schools. The wealthy people and middle-class people own property. They're going to pay those taxes every year, whereas the sales tax is dependent on the economy. You have a down year, you have less money. If it's on property taxes, you're going to have a constant, reliable revenue stream. Alabama also has the lowest property taxes in the nation. So what we would need to do is switch that property tax base and then increase those property taxes to the national average. This would lower the likelihood of proration. It would give us more money to fund teachers, fund schools, technology, and things that we need in our schools. Also, system consolidations. Each county in Alabama should have one county school system. Alabama has 67 counties, but over 130 school systems. You have all these different school systems. You have county and city systems. You have many city systems in Alabama. If you consolidate them all into one, it would be a huge savings across the board. Marshall County, Alabama, for example, has 4 city school systems with 4 different campuses. And then they have one county school system with 4 different. So you have 4 cities running their own schools, and you have one county system running 4 schools. If you combine these, you'd streamline salaries, transportation would save money, your purchases, bulk purchases. Now, you would save money. The city systems would resist this because they're going to say, hey, we have a higher tax base, and we're having to share it with the county schools that don't really have a tax base. Now, that's true, but in the spirit and the essence of school funding and doing this fairly and appropriately and funding our schools in a better way, this would be the way to go. The benefits would greatly outweigh the social and political costs. Also, legalize casino and lottery gambling. If our state of Alabama legalizes lottery and legalizes casino gambling, we would bring in more money, and we could earmark that money towards education. Alabama borders 3 states that have a lottery and 1 state with a casino. Alabama citizens leave our states and they gamble and spend money in those states, and those states keep the money they make, and they keep that money, and then they use that money for their educational processes, where we're losing it. We don't have it. So if we had legalized gambling here, our people would spend our money here, and they would use it here, and it would go to our educational systems in our state. I do want to mention this, the Poarch Creek Indians, they operate casinos in Alabama. They're under federal law. What Alabama should do is enter a compact with them and let them allow them to expand the table gaming, and then in exchange use some of the proceeds and make an agreement with them. They're going to give us some money towards their education. And also, another thing we should do is continue separate budgets. Alabama has the Educational Trust Fund and General Fund. The ETF, Educational Trust Fund, funds public education, K-12, community college, universities, where the General Fund's everything else, state troopers, prisons, Medicaid. The budgets were split decades ago to prevent the General Fund from taking all the education money. So we need to keep those separate so that education has its own fund. And also increase financial accountability. Local boards should be more financially accountable. Focus more on students, less on administrative overhead and the spending that goes along with that. Positions should be streamlined. A lot of school systems have bloated central office administrations with high salaries. If you focus more on the students, you're not going to worry about as much as administration as you would the teachers and the students. What's best for the teacher is best for the student. And be more diligent in the money that's spent. Less waste, appropriate professional leave, and things like that. In closing, many of these aren't the most popular, but it would lead to better education funding for Alabama. And I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to get to do this presentation. Have a great day.